The Night Express, The Story of a Bank Robbery, by Fred White. A pelting rain volleyed against the great glass dome of the terminus. A roaring wind boomed in the roof. Passengers hurrying along the platform glistened in big coats and tweed caps pulled close over their ears. By the platform, the Night Express was drawn up, a glittering mass of green and gold, shimmering with electric lights, warm, inviting, and cozy. Most of the corridor carriages and sleeping berths were full, for it was early in October still, and the Scotch exodus was not just yet. A few late-comers were looking anxiously out for the guard. He came presently, an alert figure in blue and silver. Really, he was very sorry. But the train was unusually crowded, and he was doing the best he could. He was perfectly aware of the fact that his questioners represented a cabinet minister on his way to Balmoral and a prominent Lothian baronet. But there are limits even to the power of an express guard on the Grand Coast Railway. "Well, what's the matter with this?" the minister demanded. "Here is an ordinary first-class coach that will do very well for us. Now, Catesby, unlock one of these doors and turn the lights on." "Very sorry, my lord," the guard explained, "but it can't be done. 2 of the carriages in the coach are quite full, as you see, and the other 2 are reserved." "As a matter of fact, my lord, we are taking a body down to Lydmouth, gentleman who is going to be buried there, and the other carriage is for the Imperial Bank of Scotland. Cashier going up north with specie, you understand." It was all plain enough and disgustingly logical. To intrude upon the presence of a body was perfectly impossible. To try and force the hand of the bank cashier equally out of the question. As head of a great financial house, the minister knew that. A platform inspector bustled along presently, with his hand to his gold-laced cap. "Saloon carriage being coupled up behind, my lord," he said. The problem was solved. The guard glanced at his watch. It seemed to him that both the bank messenger and the undertaker were cutting it fine. The coffin came presently on a hand truck. A black velvet pall lay over it, and on the sombre cloth a wreath or 2 of white lilies. The door of the carriage was closed presently, and the blinds drawn discreetly close. Following behind this came a barrow in charge of a couple of platform police. On the barrow were 2 square deal boxes, heavy out of all proportion to their size. These were deposited presently to the satisfaction of a little nervous-looking man in gold-rimmed glasses. Mr. George Skidmore, of the Imperial Bank, had his share of ordinary courage, but he had an imagination too, and he particularly disliked these periodical trips to branch banks, in convoy, so to speak. He took no risks. "Awful night, sir," the guard observed. "Rather lucky to get a carriage to yourself, sir. Don't suppose you would have done so, only we're taking a corpse as far as Lydmouth, which is our first stop." "Really?" Skidmore said carelessly. "Ill wine that blows nobody good, Catesby. I may be overcautious, but I much prefer a carriage to myself, and my people prefer it too. That's why we always give the railway authorities a few days' notice. One can't be too careful, Catesby." The guard supposed not. He was slightly, yet discreetly, amused to see Mr. C. Skidmore glanced under the seats of the first-class carriage. Certainly there was nobody either there or on the racks. The carriage at the far side was locked, and so, now, was the door next, the platform. The great glass dome was brilliantly lighted, so that anything suspicious would have been detected instantly. The guard's whistle rang out shrill and clear, and Catesby had a glimpse of Mr. Skidmore making himself comfortable as he swung himself into his van. The great green and gold serpent with the brilliant electric eyes fought its way sinuously into the throat of the wet and riotous night on its first stage of over 200 miles. Lydmouth would be the first stop, So far, Mr. Skidmore had nothing to worry him, nothing, that is, except the outside chance of a bad accident. He did not anticipate, however, that some miscreant might deliberately wreck the train on the off chance of looting those plain deal boxes. The class of thief that banks have to fear is not guilty of such clumsiness. Unquestionably, nothing could happen on this side of Lidmouth. The train was roaring along now through the fierce gale at 60-odd miles an hour. Skidmore had the carriage to himself and was not the snug, brilliantly lighted compartment made of steel. On one side was the carriage with the coffin. On the other side, another compartment filled with a party of sportsmen going north. Skidmore had noticed the four of them playing bridge just before he slipped into his own carriage. Really, he had nothing to fear. He lay back comfortably, wondering how Poe or Gaboriau would have handled such a situation with a successful robbery behind it. There are limits, of course, both to a novelist's imagination and a clever thief's process of invention. So, therefore, 3 hours and 20 minutes later, the express pulled up at Lidmouth. The station clock indicated the hour to be 11:23. Catesby swung himself out of his van onto the shining wet platform. Only one passenger was waiting there, but nobody alighted. Catesby was sure of this, because he was on the flags before a door could be opened. He came forward to give a hand with the coffin in the compartment next to Skidmore's. Then he noticed, to his surprise, that the glass in the carriage window was smashed. He could see that the little cashier was huddled up strangely in one corner, and Catesby could see also that the 2 boxes of bullion were gone. Catesby's heart was thumping against his ribs as he fumbled with his key. He laid his hand upon Skidmore's shoulder, but the latter did not move. The fair hair hung in a mass on the side of his forehead, and here it was fair no longer. There was a hole with something horribly red and slimy oozing from it. The carpet on the floor was piled up in a heap. There were red smears on the cushions. It was quite evident that a struggle had taken place here. The shattered glass in the window testified to that. And the boxes were gone. And Skidmore had been murdered by some assailant who had shot him through the brain. And this mysterious antagonist had got off with the bullion too. A thing incredible, amazing, impossible, but there it was. By some extraordinary method or another, the audacious criminal had boarded an express train travelling at 60 miles an hour in the teeth of a gale. He had contrived to enter the cashier's carriage and remove specie to the amount of £8,000. It was impossible that only one man could have carried it, but all the same it was gone. Catesby pulled himself together. He was perfectly certain that nobody at present on the train had been guilty of this thing. He was perfectly certain that nobody had left the train. Nobody could have done so after entering the station without the guard's knowledge. And to have attempted such a thing on the far side of the river bridge would have been certain death to anybody. There was a long viaduct here, posts and pillars and chains, with tragedy lurking anywhere for the madman who attempted such a thing. And until the viaduct was reached, the express had not slackened speed. Besides, the thief who had the courage and intelligence and daring to carry out a robbery like this was not the man to leave an express train travelling at a speed of upwards of 60 miles an hour. The train had to proceed. There was no help for it. There was a hurried conference between Catesby and the station master. After that, the electric lamps in the dead man's carriage were unshipped and the blinds pulled down. The matter would be fully investigated when Edinburgh was reached. Meanwhile, the station master at Lidmouth would telephone the Scotch capital and let them know there what they had to expect. Catesby crept into his van again, very queer and dizzy, and with a sensation in his legs suggestive of creeping paralysis. Naturally, the mystery of the night express caused a great sensation. Nothing like it had been known since the great crime on the south coast, which is connected with the name of Lefroy. But that was not so much a mystery as a manhunt. There, the criminal had been identified. But here, there was no trace and no clue whatever. It was in vain that the Scotland Yard authorities tried to shake the evidence of the guard, Catesby. He refused to make any admissions that would permit the police even to build up a theory. He was absolutely certain that Mr. Skidmore had been alone in the carriage at the moment that the express left London. He was absolutely certain that he had locked the door of the compartment, and the engine driver could testify that the train had never travelled at a less speed than 60 miles an hour, until the bridge over the river leading into Lidmouth station was reached. Even then, nobody could have dropped off the train without the risk of certain death. Inspector Merrick was bound to admit this himself when he went over the spot, and the problem of the missing bullion boxes was quite as puzzling in its way as the mysterious way in which Mr. Skidmore had met his death. There was no clue to this either. Certainly there had been a struggle, or there would not have been blood marks all over the place, and the window would have remained intact. Skidmore had probably been forced back into his seat, or he had collapsed there after the fatal shot was fired. The unfortunate man had been shot through the brain with an ordinary revolver of common pattern, so that for the purpose of proof the bullet was useless. There were no finger marks on the carriage door, a proof that the murderer had either worn gloves or that he had carefully removed all traces with a cloth of some kind. It was obvious, too, that a criminal of this class would take no risks, especially as there was no chance of his being hurried, seeing that he had had 3 clear hours for his work. The more the police went into the matter, the more puzzled they were. It was not a difficult matter to establish the bona fides of the passengers who travelled in the next coach with Skidmore, and as to the rest, it did not matter. Nobody could possibly have left any of the corridor coaches without attracting notice. Indeed, the very suggestion was absurd. And there the matter rested for 3 days. It must not be supposed that the authorities had been altogether idle. Inspector Merrick spent most of his time travelling up and down the line by slow local trains on the off chance of hearing some significant incident that might lead to a clue. There was one thing obvious. The bullion boxes must have been thrown off the train at some spot arranged between the active thief and his confederates. For this was too big a thing to be entirely the work of one man. Some of the gang must have been waiting along the line in readiness to receive the boxes and carry them to a place of safety. By this time, no doubt, the boxes themselves had been destroyed, but £8,000 in gold takes some moving, and probably a conveyance, a motor for choice, had been employed for this purpose. But nobody appeared to have seen or heard anything suspicious on the night of the murder. No prowling gamekeeper or watcher had noticed anything out of the common. Along the Essex and Norfolk marshes, where the Grand Coast Railway wound along like a steel snake, they had taken their desolate and dreary way. True, the dead body of a man had been found in the fowling nets up in the mouth of the Little Ouse, and nobody seemed to know who he was. But there could be no connection between this unhappy individual and the express criminal. Merrick shook his head as he listened to this from a labourer in a roadside public house where he was making a frugal lunch on bread and cheese. "What do you call fowling nets?" Merrick asked. "Why, what they catches the birds in," the rustic explained. "Thousands and thousands of duck and teal and widgeon they catches at this time of year. There's miles of nets along the road, great big nets like fowl runs. He didn't happen to see any on him as he came along in the train?" "Now I come to think of it, yes," Merrick said thoughtfully. "I was rather struck by all that netting. So they catch seabirds that way?" "Catches 'em by the thousand, they does. Birds fly against the netting in the dark and get entangled. Ducks they get by ticing 'em into a sort of cage with decoys." There's some of 'em stands the best part of half a mile long, covered in over the top like great cages. Ain't bad sport either." Merrick nodded. He recollected it all clearly now. He recalled the wide, desolate mudflats running right up to the railway embankment for some miles. At high tide, the mudflats were under water, and out of these the great massive network rose both horizontally and perpendicular. And in this tangle, the dead body of a man had been found after the storm. There was nothing really significant in the fact that the body had been discovered soon after the murder of Mr. George Skidmore. Still, there might be a connection between the two incidents. Merrick was going to make inquiries. He was after what looked like 1,000,000 to 1 chance. But then, Merrick was a detective with an imagination, which was one of the reasons why he had been appointed to the job. It was essentially a case for the theoretical man. It baffled all the established rules of the game. Late the same afternoon, Merrick arrived at Little Wallingham by means of a baker's cart. It was here that the body of the drowned man lay awaiting the slim chances of identity. If nothing transpired during the next 48 hours, the corpse would be buried by the parish authorities. The village policeman acted as Merrick's guide. It was an event in his life that he was not likely to forget. "A stranger to these parts, I should say, sir," the local officer said. "He's in a shed at the back of the Blue Anchor, where the inquest was held. If you come this way, I'll show him to you." "Anything found on the body?" "Absolutely nothing, sir. No mark on the clothing or linen either. Probably washed off some ship in the storm. Pockets were quite empty too. And no signs of foul play." "There you are, sir." Casually enough, Merrick bent over the still white form lying there. The dead face was turned up to the light, Rembrandt-esque coming through the door. The detective straightened himself suddenly and wiped his forehead. "Stranger to you, sir, of course?" the local man said grimly. "Well, no," Merrick retorted. "I happen to know the fellow quite well. I'm glad I came here." Until it was quite too dark to see any longer, Merrick was out on the mudflats asking questions. He appeared to be greatly interested in the wildfowlers and the many methods of catching their prey. He learned, incidentally, that on the night of the express murder, most of the nets and lures had been washed away. He took minute particulars as to the state of the tide on the night in question. He wanted to know if the nets were capable of holding up against any great force. For instance, if a school of porpoises came along, or if a fish-eagle or an osprey found itself entangled in the meshes. The Fowlers smiled. They invited Merrick to try it for himself. On that stormy east coast it was foolish to take any risks, and Merrick was satisfied. As a matter of fact, he was more than satisfied. He was really beginning to see his way at last. By the time he got back to his headquarters again, he had practically reconstructed the crime. As he stood on the railway permanent way, gazing down into the network of the Fowlers below, he smiled to himself. He could have tossed a biscuit onto the top of the long lengths of tarred and knotted rigging. Later on, he telephoned to the London terminus of the Grand Coast Railway for the people there to place the services of Catesby at his disposal for a day or two. Could Catesby meet him at Lydmouth tomorrow? The guard could, and did. He frankly admitted that he was grateful for the little holiday. He looked as if he wanted it. The corners of his mouth twitched. His hands were shaky. "It's nerves, Mr. Merrick," he explained. "We all suffer from them at times. Only we don't like the company to know it. You understand? To tell the truth, I've never got over that affair at the junction here 8 years ago. I expect you remember that." Merrick nodded. Catesby was alluding to a great railway tragedy which had taken place outside Lydmouth Station some few years back. It had been a most disastrous affair for a local express, and Catesby had been acting as guard to the train. He spoke of it under his breath. "I dream of it occasionally even now," he said. The engine left the line and dragged the train over the embankment into the river. If you ask me how I managed to escape, I can't tell you. I never come into Lidmouth with the night express now without my head out of the window of the van, right away from the viaduct, till she pulls up at the station. And what's more, I never shall. It isn't fear, mind you, because I've as much pluck as any man. It's just nerves. We get 'em in our profession, too. Merrick smiled. Did you happen to be looking out of the window on the night of the murder? Yes, and every other night, too. Haven't I just told you so? Directly we strike the viaduct, I come to my feet by instinct. Always look out the same side, I suppose? Yes, on the left. That's the platform side, you understand. Then, if anybody had left the train there, anybody left the train, why, we were travelling at 50 miles an hour when we reached the viaduct. Oh, yes, if anybody had left the train, I should have been bound to see them, of course. But you can't see out of both windows at once. Nobody could leave the train by the other side. The stone parapet of the viaduct almost touches the footboard, and there's a drop of 90 feet below that. Of course I see what you are driving at, Mr. Merrick. Now look here. I locked Mr. Skidmore in the carriage myself, and I can prove that nobody got in before we left London. That would have been too dangerous a game, so long as the train was passing any number of brilliantly lighted stations, and by the time we got into the open, we were going at 60 miles an hour. That speed never slackened till we were just outside Lidmouth, and I was watching at the moment that our pace dropped. I had my head out of the window of my van till we pulled up by the platform. I am prepared to swear to all this if you like. Lord knows how the thing was done, and I don't suppose anybody else ever will." "You are mistaken there," said Merrick dryly. "Now, what puzzles you, of course, is the manner in which the murderer left the train." "Well, isn't that the whole mystery?" "Not to me. That's the part I really do know. Not that I can take any great credit to myself, because luck helped me. It was, perhaps, the most amazing piece of luck I have ever had. It was my duty, of course, to take no chances, and I didn't. But we'll come to that presently. Let it suffice for the moment that I know how the murderer left the train. What puzzles me is to know how he got on it. We can dismiss every other passenger in the train, and we need not look for an accomplice. There were accomplices, of course, but they were not on the express. Why didn't Mr. Smith? Skidmore travel in one of the corridor coaches? He was too nervous. He always had a first-class carriage to himself. We knew he was coming, and that was why we attached an ordinary first-class coach to the train. We shouldn't do it for anybody, but Lord Rendlemore, the chairman of Mr. Skidmore's bank, is also one of our directors. The coach came in handy the other night because we had an order from a London undertaker to bring a corpse as far as here to Lidmouth." "Really? You would have to have a separate carriage for that." "Naturally, Mr. Merrick. It was sort of killing two birds with one stone." "I see. When did you hear about the undertaking job?" "The same morning we heard from the bank that Mr. Skidmore was going to Lidmouth. We reserved a coach at once, and had it attached to the express. The other carriages were filled with ordinary passengers." "Why didn't I hear of this before?" Merrick asked. "I don't know. It doesn't seem to me to be of much importance. You might just as well ask me questions as to the passengers' baggage." "Everything is of importance," Merrick said sententiously. "In our profession there are no such things as trifles. I suppose there will be no difficulty in getting at the facts of this corpse business. I'll make inquiries here presently." So far Merrick professed himself to be satisfied. But there were still difficulties in the way. The station people had a clear recollection of the receipt of a coffin on the night of the tragedy, and, late as it was, The gruesome thing had been fetched away by the people whom it was consigned to. A plain hearse, drawn by one horse, had been driven into the station yard. The consignment note had been receipted in the usual way, and there was an end of the matter. Lidmouth was a big place, with nearly 250,000 of inhabitants, and would necessarily contain a good many people in the undertaking line. Clearly, it was no business of the railway company to take this thing any further. Merrick admitted that freely enough. It was nearly dark when he came back to the station, profoundly dissatisfied with the wasted afternoon. "No good," he told Catesby. "At the same time, there are consolations, and, after all, I am merely confirming my suspicions. I suppose your people here are on the telephone. If so, I should like to send a message to your head office. I want the name of the firm in London who consigned the coffin here. I suppose the station master could manage this for me." An hour or so later, the information came. Merrick, at the telephone, wanted a little further assistance. Would the Grand Coast Railway call up the undertaker's firm whilst he held the line and ask the full particulars as to the body sent from London to Lidmouth? For half an hour Merrick stood patiently there till the reply came. "Are you there? Is that Inspector Merrick?" "Oh, yes. Well, we have called up Lincoln and Co., the undertakers. We got on to the manager himself. He declares that the whole thing is a mistake. They have not sent a corpse over our trunk system for 2 months. I read the manager, the letter asking for special facilities, a letter on the firm's own paper. The manager does not hesitate to say the whole thing is a forgery. I think he is right, Inspector, if we can do anything else for you." Merrick hung up the receiver and smiled as if pleased with himself. He turned to his companion. "Catesby." "It's all right," he said. "Is there any way we can get back to London tonight? The whole thing is perfectly plain now." Though Merrick returned to London thoroughly satisfied, he knew that the sequel was not just yet. There was much conjuring work to be done before it would be possible to place all the cards on the table. The Christmas holidays had arrived before Merrick obtained a couple of warrants, and, armed with these, he went down to Brighton on Boxing Day and put up at the Hotel Regina, registering himself as Colonel Beaumont, sometime of the United States Field Forces. Merrick could pose as an authority on Cuba, for on one occasion he had been there for 6 months on the lookout for a defaulting bank manager. He had made certain changes in his appearance, and just now he bore little resemblance to Inspector Merrick of New Scotland Yard. The big hotel on the front was full. There was a smart dance that same night, preceded by a children's party and Christmas tree. The house swarmed with young folks, and a good many nationalities were represented. On occasions like these, somebody generally takes the lead, and by common consent, the part of the chief of the events had been allotted to the Marquis de Branza. To begin with, he was immensely rich. He had vast estates in Italy. He had been staying at the Regina for the past month, and it was whispered that his bill had reached 3 figures. He entertained lavishly. He was the soul of hospitality. He was going to buy a palace in King's Gardens, and more or less settle down in Brighton. In addition to all this, the Marquis was a handsome man, very fascinating, and a prime favourite with all the boys and girls at the Regina. He had his little peculiarities. Of course, for instance, he paid for everything in gold. All his hotel bills were met with current coin. Merrick had gleaned all this before he had been a day at the Regina. They were quite a happy family, and the Colonel speedily found himself at home. The Marquis welcomed him as if he owned the hotel, and as if everybody was his guest. The dance was a great success, as also were the presents in connection with the cotillon promoted by the Marquis. At 2 o'clock the following morning, the Marquis was entertaining a select party in the smoking room. The ladies had all vanished by this time. The Marquis was speaking of his adventures. He really had quite a talent in that direction. Naturally, a man of his wealth was certain to be the mark for swindlers. Merrick listened with an approving smile. He knew that most of these stories were true, for they had all been recorded from time to time at Scotland Yard. "You would have made an excellent detective, Marquis," he said. "You have made it quite clear where the police blundered over that Glasgow tragedy. I suppose you read all about the Grand Coast Railway murder." The Marquis started ever so slightly. There was a questioning look in his eyes. "Did you?" he said. "Naturally one would, Colonel, but a matter the most inexplicable. I gave him up. From the very first I gave him up. If the guard Catesby was not the guilty person, then I admit I have no theory." One by one, the smoking room company faded away. Presently only Merrick and the Marquis remained, save one guest who had fallen asleep in his chair. A sleepy waiter looked in and vanished again. The hotel was absolutely quiet now. Merrick, however, was wide awake enough, so apparently was the Marquis. All the same, he yawned ostentatiously. "Let us to bed," he said. "Tomorrow." "Perhaps no," Merrick said somewhat curtly. "I prefer tonight. Sit down." The last two words came crisply and with a ring of command in them. The Marquis bowed as he dropped into a chair and lighted a fresh cigarette. A little red spot glowed on either of his brown cheeks. His eyes glittered. "You want to speak to me, Colonel?" he said. "Very much indeed." "Now, you are an exceedingly clever man, Marquis, and you may be able to help me. It happens that I am deeply interested in the Grand Coast Express murder. In fact, I have devoted the last 2 months to its solution." "With no success whatever, my dear Colonel," the Marquis murmured. "On the contrary, my dear Marquis, with absolute satisfaction. I am quite sure that you will be interested in my story." The Marquis raised his cigarette graciously. "You are very good to give me your confidence," he said. "Pray proceed." "Thank you. I will not bore you with any preliminary details, for they are too recent to have faded from your memory. Sufficient that we have a murder committed in an express train. We have the disappearance of £8,000 in gold, without any trace of the criminal. That he was on the train at the start is obvious. That he was not in any of the carriages conveying ordinary passengers is equally obvious. It is also certain that he left the train after the commission of the crime. Doubtless you read the evidence of the guard to prove that nobody left the train after the viaduct leading to Ligmouth station was reached. Therefore, the murderer contrived to make his escape when the express was travelling at 60 miles per hour. "Is not all this superfluous?" the Marquis asked. "Well, not quite. I am going to tell you how the murderer joined the train and how he left it after the murder and the robbery. You are going to tell me that. Is it possible?" "I think so," Merrick said modestly. "Now, Mr. Skidmore had a compartment to himself. He was locked in the very last thing, and nobody joined the train afterward. Naturally, an amateur detective like myself wanted to know who was in the adjoining compartments. 3 of these could be dismissed at once. But in the 4th there was a corpse. A corpse! But there was no mention of that at the inquest. No, but the fact remains. A corpse in a coffin, in a dark compartment with the blinds down. And, strangely enough, the firm of undertakers who consigned, or were supposed to consign, the body to Ligmouth denied the whole business. Therefore, it is only fair to suppose that the whole thing was a put-up job to get a compartment in the coach that Mr. Skidmore travelled by. I am going to assume that in that coffin the murderer lay concealed. But let me give you a light. Your cigarette is out." "I smoke no more," the Marquis said. "My throat, he is dry." And then, well then, the first part is easy. The man gets out of the coffin and proceeds to fill it with some heavy substance which has been smuggled into the carriage under the pall. He screws the lid down and presently makes his way along the footboard to the next compartment. An athlete in good condition could do that. In fact, a sailor has done it in a drunken freak more than once. Mind you, I don't say that murder was intended in the first instance, but we'll presume that there was a struggle. The thief probably lost his temper, and perhaps Mr. Skidmore irritated him. Now, the rest was easy. It was easy to pack up the gold in leather bags, each containing 1,000 sovereigns, and to drop them along the line at some spot previously agreed upon. I have no doubt that the murderer and his accomplices travelled many times up and down the line before the details were finally settled. Anyway, there was no risk here. The broken packing cases were pitched out also, probably in some thick wood. Or they might have been weighted and cast into a stream. "Are you interested?" the Marquis gurgled. He had some difficulty in speaking. "A little dangerous," he said. "Our ingenious friend could not possibly screw himself down in the coffin after returning to his compartment. And have you perceived the danger of discovery at Lidmouth?" "Precisely," Merrick said dryly. "It is refreshing to meet with so luminous a mind as yours. There were many dangers, many risks to take. The train might have been stopped. Lots of things might have happened. It would be far better for the man to leave the express. And he did so. The express at top speed. Impossible. To the ordinary individual, yes. But then, you see, this was not an ordinary individual. He was, let us suppose, an acrobat, a man of great nerve and courage, accustomed to trapeze work and the use of the diving net. But, Colonel, pardon me, where does the net come in?" "The net came in at a place near Little Wallingham on the Norfolk coast. There are miles of net up there, trap and flight nets close by the side of the line. These nets are wide and strong. They run many furlongs without supports, so that an acrobat could easily turn a somersault onto one of these at a given spot without the slightest risk. He could study out the precise spot carefully beforehand. There are lightships on the sands to act as guides. I have been down to the spot and studied it all out for myself. The thing is quite easy for the class of man I mean. I am not taking any great credit to myself, because I happened to see the body of the man who essayed that experiment. I recognized him for—" "You recognized him? You knew who he was?" "Certainly. He was Luigi Bianca, who used to perform in London years ago with his brother Joseph on the high trapeze. Then one of them got into trouble, and subsequently embarked, as the papers say, on a career of crime. And when I saw the body of Luigi, I knew at once that he had had a hand in the murder of Mr. Skidmore. When the right spot was reached, the fellow took a header in the dark, boldly enough. But he did not know that the storm had come with a very high October tide, and washed the nets away. He fell on the sands and dislocated his neck. But I had something to go on with. When I found out about the bogus corpse, I began to see my way. I have been making careful inquiries ever since for the other criminal." "The other criminal?" "You mean to insinuate—" "I insinuate nothing," Merrick said coldly. "Naturally enough, I wanted to find Joseph Bianca. He was the man who picked up the gold. He was the man who hired a car in London from Moss & Co. in Regent Street for a week. This was to recover the gold, and incidentally also to take up the thief who stole it. I wanted to find Joseph Bianca, and I've done it." The Marquis leaped to his feet. As he did so, the man in the distant chair woke up and moved across the room. "Don't make a fuss," Merrick said quietly. "You will be able to explain presently, perhaps what you are doing here, posing as a marquis, and where you got all that ready money from. Meanwhile, let me inform you that I am Inspector Merrick of Scotland Yard, and that this is Sergeant Matthews. Joseph Bianca, you are my prisoner, and I have a warrant for your arrest as an accessory before and after the fact for the murder of Mr. George Skidmore. Ask them to call us a cab, Matthews. 2. Over. The Garden Wall. The Story of a Vacation by Lois Hamilton. Maybe the impression, which floated vaguely as a perfume in the wake of the departing, Mr. and Mrs. Jasper Prentice, adapted itself pleasingly to any point of view. Generally it was thought that Katrina Prentice was to remain at home under the eye of Grandfather McBride. Particularly was this Grandfather McBride's reading of the unspoken word. But Miss Prentice herself thought so, otherwise that the situation completely reversed itself. To Miss Prentice, Grandfather McBride was left absolutely under her eye. Meanwhile, the Jasper Prentices, characteristically explaining nothing, commanding nothing, leaving events to work themselves out somehow, as events have been known to do, were off for their month's fishing without undue worry. "Grandfather will smoke his pipe all over the house," remarked Mrs. Prentice easily as they drove away. "Oh, Katrina will manage somehow," returned Mr. Prentice as easily. "They'll come to terms. By the way, Kitty, we mustn't forget that marmalade." And, absorbed in their list of supplies, the Jasper Prentices disappeared from view. Grandfather McBride, 81, dependent, save in moments of excitement, upon his knotted stick, hard-featured, with a rusty beard and a shabby black hat, departed slowly for his own quarters. Miss Prentice, 21, hazel-eyed and graceful, with a wonderful creamy skin under a crown of auburn braids, sank dreamily upon the broad porch step and gazed across the green lawn into the future. "A whole month," thought Miss Prentice, "of doing as I please, consulting nobody, ordering things, going to places, and coming home to freedom." Miss Prentice spread out her hands with a sigh of content. "Not that I'm interfered with ever," she added, reproaching herself, "but now, well, I'm it." She rose swiftly and turned up the steps. In the wide doorway stood Grandfather McBride, stick in hand, hat jammed down, and in his mouth, at a defiant angle, a battered black pipe. A red flag, backed up by a declaration of the rights of man, could not have spoken more plainly. Miss Prentice drew back. Mr. McBride stepped forward. Their eyes met. Then the old gentleman flung down his challenge. He removed the pipe and held it poised in his hand. "What you going to do today, Triney?" he asked briskly. "When you going over to see the Deering's parrot? There ain't another such bird in America. You go over there this morning and see that parrot. Don't loll about the house. Don't be lazy." Whereupon, with less profanity, but as much of autocracy as was ever displayed by an Irish boss whipping into shape the lowliest of his Italian gang, Mr. Seeker, McBride replaced his pipe elaborately and walked off with the honours. Katrina, utterly astonished, stared after him, then shrugged, then smiled. "Poor grandfather," she reached at length. "In minor matters, I'll let him have his way." The next day, Grandfather McBride smoked his pipe on the porch. On the third morning, he smoked it in the drawing-room out of sheer defiance, for he never entered the room save under compulsion. Katrina, reminding herself that peace was to be desired above victory, shrugged once more, smiled, and went for a ride. When she swept in, an hour or so later, Grandfather McBride was in the back garden with John, and the smoke of a huge bonfire obscured the sunlight. This was revolution, simple and straightforward, and Katrina went at once to the back garden. "John," she said, "what is the meaning of this? Don't you know that Mr. Prentice never allows bonfires? The rubbish is to be carted away, not set on fire." John, apologetic, perturbed, nodded toward the old gentleman. "Yes, miss, I know. I told Mr. McBride. Miss Grandfather McBride turned coldly upon Katrina. I ordered this bonfire, he said. But, Grandfather, you know the old orders. Father never allows them. I allow them, said Mr. McBride. Your father's away fishing, and I'm in charge. This is my bonfire. I order bonfires when I please. I like 'em. I like the smell of 'em. I like the smoke. Here an unexpected cough gave Katrina a word. But, Grandfather, she began again, only to be cut short. When the folks are home, I sit still and mind my own business. Now they're away, I'm going to do things. I'm on a vacation myself, said Mr. McBride, and I'll have a bonfire on the front lawn if I say so. You go back to the house, Katrina, and read Gibson. Ibsen, flashed Katrina. I don't care what his Dutch name is, read him. Or else, a grim light of humour in his hard grey eye, go over and see that parrot. Katrina almost stamped her foot. I loathe parrots, she cried, and I came out to talk about this bonfire. I know you did, said Mr. McBride, but this parrot ain't like other parrots. It's a clown. It would make a rag baby laugh. Katrina, flushed, angry, at a loss what to say, decided to say nothing. The sight of John, discreetly gazing at the roof of the chicken house, the grimness of Grandfather's face, the discomfort of the choking smoke, urged a dignified retreat. She turned abruptly and left them, overwhelmed at the exhibition furnished by Mr. McBride, confounded at his sudden leap into activity after years of serene floating, and absolutely in the dark as to any method of controlling him in the future. For a week, his pipe and his daily bonfire contented Mr. McBride. Between himself and Katrina, relations were polite, but not cordial. Katrina preserved a dignity which deceived neither of them. Both knew that she was awaiting something sensational, and the fact worried the old gentleman, for already he had exhausted his possibilities. He longed for new ideas in this matter of revolution, but none came. He began to be bored by bonfires and the lack of opposition to them. Even the parrot failed to amuse, and he was sinking into dull monotony when a walk down the long lane behind the back garden, one sunny afternoon, changed the horizon of his world. He was gone for 2 hours, but Katrina was away from the house herself and did not notice. The next afternoon he disappeared for 3, finally dragging in weary in body but high in spirit. Twice at dinner he chuckled audibly, and 3 times he recommended the parrot across the street to Katrina. The next day he vanished after luncheon and was late for dinner. At this, Katrina decided to take a hand. "Grandfather," she said abruptly at dessert, after a long interval of silence on both sides, "it's all very well to take a vacation, but there is such a thing as overdoing it. I'm sure you would do nothing that would alarm Mother, and I know that if she were at home she would worry over you. For days you have had no nap. Please rest tomorrow. Don't go walking. Let me drive you to the club for luncheon." The old gentleman glanced up at Katrina quickly. "I declare, if I hadn't forgot all about that fellow till this minute," he said. "Speaking of the club, how's Sparks, Katrina?" Katrina sat suddenly erect and her colour deepened. "Do you, by any chance, mean Mr. Willoughby Park, Grandfather? If so, I know nothing whatever about him. I haven't seen him for a week." This with a jerk. "Don't you marry that chap, Katrina," went on Mr. McBride, unimpressed, "and don't you let him come around here. He's no good. A fellow that hangs around a country club when he ain't hanging around a girl is always no good. You marry a chap with brains, Katrina, even if he ain't so long on the cash. Why, I know a young fellow." Mr. McBride pulled himself up short. "You dash in for brains, Triney, and I'll take out my pocketbook." Here he nodded, as if concluding a bargain, but Katrina was already upon her feet. "Grandfather McBride, "You are growing insufferable," she cried. "Simply because I mentioned the club, you assume that I am angling for a man that has been decently polite to me. I have never been invited to marry Mr. Park. And you give me low advice about laying traps for some other sort of a man. And you mention pocketbooks. And you go off alone for hours and come home worn out. And you smoke your horrible old pipe and build your sickening bonfires just to spite me. I think you are a wretch, and I've worried over you every day since Mother left. Here." She stopped suddenly, with a catch in her throat. The old gentleman looked at her silently. Then he got up and came around the table. Awkwardly, he patted her shoulder. Katrina sat down. "I'm glad you don't like sparks, my dear," said Mr. McBride, leaning on his stick. "And don't worry your heart over Grandfather, Tiny. Grandfather's no fool. He ain't had so much fun in years." Mr. McBride winked just here and put on an air of profound mystery. "I wonder where you do disappear to," said Katrina. "I think I'll go along." "Don't you do that," spoke up Mr. McBride alertly. "Don't you do that. A man can't stand a woman tagging at his heels. He's got to have room and air to breathe." "Smoke, you mean?" put in Katrina with returning spirit. "And I warn you, Grandfather, that if you make fires off our place, you'll be arrested." "Pooh! Fires!" said Mr. McBride contemptuously. "Amusement for children." "I ain't a-making fires these days, Katriny. I've got other things to do." And, with a final pat upon her shoulder and a last most telling wink, Grandfather McBride dragged himself wearily but triumphantly to bed. When Katrina, on the lookout next afternoon, saw Mr. McBride join John in the back garden, hold with him a whispered consultation broken by many stealthy glances toward the house, and finally disappear with him down the lane, behind a wheelbarrow laden with boards, she gave orders that she was not at home, waited half an hour, and followed. The lane wound coolly green and deserted from the Prentice place into the heart of the country. Katrina, walking steadily, passed her own, past the Graham and the Haskell boundaries, and stopped in surprise. At a branching path hung a new and conspicuous sign. "Private road, no trespassing, under penalty of the law." It was a churlish sign. The people of the neighborhood, a summer settlement of friends and pleasant informalities, were used to no such signs. And Katrina, knowing Grandfather McBride, turned at once into the branching path. At some distance in, she passed a similar sign, with every mark of disdain. Finally, she was brought up short by a wire fence with a gate, high, wooden, and new, that stretched across the path. She tried the gate, but it did not budge. From the wood beyond came the sound of voices and the strokes of a hammer. With a quick glance behind her and a determined set to her chin, she began to climb the gate. She was descending upon the other side in safety, when Grandfather McBride came upon her. His hat was pushed back upon his head, his stick was forgotten. He descended upon her as might a hungry lion upon its prey. He roared. In fact, he bellowed. "Katrina Prentice, get back over that fence. Climb back over that gate. You're trespassing. Didn't you see the signs? Are you blind? Can't you read? What do you mean by coming in here where you don't belong? Climb back there and go home at once." Katrina, unprepared for battle and aware of being at a disadvantage, swallowed hard and obeyed. She climbed back over the gate. Once upon solid earth, however, and she glared as fiercely at Grandfather McBride as he stared ferociously at her. "I'm not a child," she said furiously when he stopped to breathe, "to be ordered about and sent home and insulted. I have never been so treated in my life, and I give you fair warning, Grandfather, that I'll stand it no longer. After this, I'll do as I please." Whereupon Katrina, having womanlike, in the act of obedience, said her say, retreated with dignity and dispatch. Behind her, Mr. McBride waved his recovered stick over the gate and shouted, but she did not turn nor attempt an answer. He came home within an hour, slowly, leaning heavily upon his stick. John followed with the empty wheelbarrow. They parted at the barn, and Mr. McBride went at once to his room and shut the door. Katrina, sitting at her own window, looked thoughtfully into space and swung a key upon her forefinger. After a time she stood up, smoothed her hair, and pinned on her wide, rose-laden hat. Then she went down the hall quietly, stopped before Mr. McBride's door, and listened a moment. A gentle snore proclaimed Mr. McBride's occupation. Katrina fitted the key into the lock and turned it, took it out again, and slipped it beneath a corner of the rug, listened a further moment, and then walked down the stairs, out through the back garden, and, with a final glance behind her, turned once more into the green and deserted lane. It must be confessed that Katrina started upon her quest in a spirit far removed from that of your single-minded explorer. She was urged by a variety of causes. Among them was a determination to disobey Grandfather McBride, to serve him with his own medicine, to pay him in his own coin, and to do it as quickly and as frankly as possible. Her rapidly increasing curiosity concerning the region he guarded with so much mystery counted as well, but the paramount force, for Katrina was young enough to take her responsibility seriously, was anxiety over the old gentleman himself. In fact, Katrina departed, as did Lot's wife, with her face and her thought turned backward, a policy not conducive to brilliant success in exploration. This time, however, she was stopped by no one. She passed the gate safely, penetrated the wood, and came at length upon a part of Mr. McBride's secret. It was a rough little flight of steps, made with the help of John, the wheelbarrow, and the boards, which led to the top of a high brick wall. The wall astounded Katrina even more than did the steps, which is saying a good deal. The whole elaborate contrivance for keeping people away puzzled Katrina. It was some time before she mounted the steps and looked over the wall, but when she finally did so, she ceased to be merely puzzled. She became lost in a maze of wonder. Stretching before her was a wide expanse of green. Just opposite stood a long, low building of workmanlike appearance. At the left was a very presentable rose garden, at the right a rustic summer house. Surrounding all was the high brick wall. But it was none of these things that amazed Katrina. Moving toward her from the door of the long building came a little procession, men and women walking slowly, sedately dressed in old-time silks and finery, decked with plumes, jewels, laces, bouquets of flowers. Arrived at a broad space near the summer house, the company, after a series of low and preliminary bows, launched forth into a stately dance. Katrina, conscious of music, descried an individual in very modern blue overalls who manipulated a phonograph. A voice from beyond the summer house called forth instructions at intervals with a huskiness vaguely suggestive of old Coney. "More side play there, Miss Beals. Just imagine he's a young hobo you're in love with, and your father won't let him up the steps. You're doing the Merry Widow act while the old man's not looking. Don't bow so low you hide your face, Mr. Peters. Your face is worth money to us all. And everybody get a move on. You're too slow. Hit it up a bit. Jim." The overalls, thus adjured, accelerated the time of his machine, and a new spirit animated the group. Katrina leaned far over the wall in order to miss nothing. At length, the dance, moving toward a finale, reached it with a succession of stirring chords and a flourish of curtsies, and the group dissolved. "That'll do for today." "You can knock off now," began the husky voice, when Jim, glancing up from his phonograph, beheld Katrina in her rose-laden hat, leaning far over the wall. If he had stopped to reflect, he might have ignored the vision, for he was but man, and the vision a guilelessly pretty one. But he did not stop to reflect. With Jim, to see a thing was to proclaim it abroad. Immediately he yelled, "Hey, get onto the lady on the wall. Hey, Mr. Connor, come around here. There's somebody on the wall. Hey!" At once Katrina, to her utmost discomfort, became the center of the stage. Everybody turned, saw her, and began to stare. The silken ladies, the velvet gentlemen, delayed their return to modern apparel and took her in. Jim stared clamorously. Mr. Connor, rounding the summer house, glared angrily. To Katrina, even the long building blinked its windows at her, and she thought with sudden longing of Grandfather McBride. She wished she had not come. Most of all, she wished to go. But she did not quite dare. At once, Mr. Connor took charge of the situation. "Say, young lady," he demanded in a truculent manner, "what do you mean by getting into these grounds and rubbering at us over our wall? Don't you know you can be run in for passing those signs? Didn't you see that gate?" "Oh, yes," faltered Katrina. "Yes, I saw the gate." "Well, how'd you get past that gate and them signs?" Mr. Connor wanted to know. I climbed the gate," hesitated Katrina. Clearly this was not what Mr. Connor expected. Such simplicity must cover guile. A suppressed smile glimmered through the group, and Mr. Shrew, Connor, became more suspicious of Katrina. "I don't want no kidding now, do you hear?" he burst forth. "You're in a tight place, young woman, and you may as well wake up to the fact at once. The Knickerbocker is doing things on a plane of high art, and our methods are our own. Now, I want to know who you represent. And freshness don't go, do you see?" Katrina hardly heard Mr. Connor. Her mind was occupied with the freedom that lay clear behind her, and the possible patrol wagons and police stations before her. Perhaps she might conciliate this red-faced man by allowing him to talk, by being mild and meek and polite. Perhaps a chance might come for a desperate attempt at escape. But Mr. Connor, conversing fluently, read her very soul. "Bring that there light ladder, Jim," he interrupted himself to order. "And if you try to get away, young woman, it'll be the worse for you. Now, I want to know what yellow sheet you represent." "Yellow? Why do you take me for a newspaper woman?" cried Katrina. "I'm not. I'm nothing of the sort. I've never been inside a newspaper office in my life." "Of course not," observed Mr. Connor ironically. "They never have. Always society ladies that can't write their own names. You stand just where you are, miss, till that ladder arrives. Then I'm coming up to confiscate any little sketches and things you may have handy." "You are a brute," said Katrina, lips trembling, but head held high. "I am Miss Prentice. I live near here, and you will not dare to detain me." "Oh, won't I?" returned Mr. Connor. "I have a picture of myself letting you go. And where the deuce is Jim?" He turned impatiently toward the building across the lawn, then somewhat relaxed his frown. "Oh, well, I can take an orchestra chair," observed Mr. Connor. "Here comes the boss." Katrina, with deepening concern, glanced from Mr. Connor toward the long building. A young man was sprinting across the stretch of green, a clean-cut young man in grey flannels. At the first sight of him, Katrina caught her breath sharply and blushed. It was Katrina's despair that she blushed so easily. As the young man neared them, the spectators achieved the effect of obliterating themselves from the landscape. They melted into space. There remained the young man, Mr. Connor, and a divinely flushed Katrina. The young man looked up at her without smiling. He bowed to her gravely. Then he turned to Mr. Connor. With a few low-spoken words, he booted Mr. Connor. Katrina, gazing at the rose garden, heard something in spite of herself. She heard her name, and caught Mr. Connor's articulate amazement. She heard mentioned some old gentleman. She heard a recommendation to Mr. Connor to go more slowly in the future and to mend his manners at all times. After a hint to Mr. Connor to look up Jim and the ladder, she heard that gentleman withdraw much more quietly than he had come, and her eyes finally left the rose garden and looked straight down into those of warm grey belonging to the young man below her. "Will you mind waiting just a moment longer?" he asked. "This is more luck than I've had lately." Katrina smiled tremulously. "It's in my power to go then," she said. "No," said the young man firmly, "it isn't. On second thoughts, you are to stay just where you are till that blockhead brings the ladder. I've a good deal to say. I'm going to walk home with you." "Oh," said Katrina. "And what will become of your fancy dress party?" "My fancy dress party," returned the young man, "will catch the next trolley for New York." "Oh, here labours the trusty henchman across the green. Right you are, Jim. No, the lady is not to come down. I'm to go up." And go up he did, in the twinkling of an eye, and in less than another the rose-wreathed hat and the young man's grey cap had disappeared from view together. "Well, what do you know about that?" observed Jim under his breath, staring at the top of the wall. He whistled softly. Then he grinned. "Hypnotized by thunder," concluded Jim, returning with the ladder. Meanwhile, the two lingered homeward through the deepening twilight. The gate opened easily to a key from the young man's pocket. The signs glimmered dimly. They talked lightly, but what they said proved to both simply an airy veil for what they did not say. Katrina spoke of the club and the tennis tournament. "Of course, we lost," she said. "Our best man," with a sidelong look, did not enter. "The committee said that he was away on business. I see now that they were misinformed." "But they weren't," said the young man eagerly. "If you mean me, I am away on business. Why, do you know it's 7 days since I've seen you?" Katrina regarded her neat brown shoes. "The fact is," continued the young man diffidently, "I've been trying a new method with you. I've been endeavouring to be missed, and I'm afraid to hear that I haven't been." "A little wholesome fear is good for anyone," observed Katrina judicially. "But I can truthfully say that I rejoiced at the sight of you this afternoon. That red-faced man was about to drag me off the wall by the hair." "Oh, Connor," said the young man. "Connor's not polished, but in his line he's a jewel. He used to be a stage manager, and considered in that light he's really mild." "Is he?" said Katrina dryly. "Does he stage manage for you?" "Practically that. Don't scoff, please. You see, there's a big future in this business. My father growled at first, but he's come clean around. The land was mine, and we are using it this way. The American public are going in for this thing. They want amusement, and they want it quick. And the thing is, to provide them with what they want, when they want it." "Oh," said Katrina, "and you are providing the American public with what they want back there?" With a tilt of her head behind her. "Exactly," he answered. "That's our plant. We are the Knickerbocker Film Manufacturing Company." "Oh," said Katrina again. "And the fancy dress people?" "We are getting up Romeo and Juliet," said the young man. "Please don't laugh. It's been proven that the moving picture audiences like Shakespeare canned." "Moving picture audiences," repeated Katrina in surprise, and then, as the light broke, she stopped short and looked at the young man. "Why didn't you guess?" he queried. "The summer house? Why, of course, the summer house must have hidden the camera." He looked at her dejectedly. "I've wanted you so much to know all about it," he said, "and now that you do, it sounds, oh, drivelling." "But it doesn't," cried Katrina, eyes shining. "It sounds splendid. It sounds thrilling. I'm sure it will be a success. You're bound to make it one. I congratulate you. You've left out a good deal. You've told your story very badly, but I'm good at filling in. The fact is, I'm proud to know you, and you may shake hands with me if you wish to." "Oh, Katrina?" murmured the young man, and they clasped hands. It was just here that Grandfather McBride turned into the lane from the back garden and came upon them. When they became aware of him, leaning heavily upon his stick and frowning at them through the dusk, Katrina braced herself to meet whatever might come. But suddenly, to her intense surprise, Mr. McBride beamed upon them radiantly. "Well, well, Katrini," he said in high good humour, "so you've been over that gate again, eh? Been looking over that wall, eh? I knew you would, my dear. I knew you would. There's some of the McBride spirit in you after all, thank God. I meant to take you myself, but you got ahead of me." Here he shook hands with the young man. "Glad to see you again, my boy," said Grandfather McBride. "Brought my little girl home, eh?" "Well, well." "We were on the way," admitted the young man with enthusiasm. "I see you got the steps up, sir." "Yes," said Mr. McBride. "Oh, yes. I'm much obliged to you for the permission. It's as good as any vaudeville, and it's a sight nearer home. You're bound to make money. I tell my granddaughter, with a triumphant nod to the lady in question, to bank on brains and energy and American push. I tell her, with a profound wink to Katrina, to let this old family nonsense and society racket go hang. I'm glad she met you. But we mustn't stand here in the lane, Grandfather," put in Katrina hurriedly. "It's getting damp." "That's so," agreed Mr. McBride. "And it's getting late." He hooked his cane about the young man's arm. "Come in and have dinner with us," he said. Katrina stared in amazement at Mr. McBride. The young man looked eagerly at Katrina. "If Miss Prentice will allow me," he began. "Huh, Miss Prentice," spoke up Mr. McBride. "What's she got to say about it? I allow you." And as Katrina, behind Mr. McBride's back, smiled and nodded, the young man accepted promptly. Together the three went through the back garden and up to the house. Arrived there, Katrina disappeared. Grandfather McBride, after settling his guest, came straight upstairs and stopped at her door. "Little cuss!" beamed Mr. McBride. "Going off, locking up her old grandfather and meeting young chaps." "Say, Katrini," he remarked casually, "he's a fine fellow, ain't he?" Katrina, busy with her hair, nodded. "Now, if I was a girl," continued Mr. McBride diplomatically, "and a fellow like that took a shine to me, I'd show a glimmer of sense. I'd up and return it." "Would you?" remarked Katrina. "I'm glad you like him." "You see, Grandfather, you are too smart for me. I didn't know until just now that you had even met Mr. Park." "Mr. Park." McBride's smile stiffened, then froze, finally disappeared. He opened his mouth and shut it. He swallowed hard. At last he got it out. "Katrini! Katrini, is that Sparks, that fellow downstairs?" "Is that Sparks?" "Hush," said Katrina. "Of course that is Willoughby Park." "Why, Grandfather, didn't you ask his name?" "No," said Mr. McBride, "I didn't. I just saw he was a fine, likely." He stopped abruptly. "Well, I'll be damned," said Mr. McBride. Katrina came over to him and put her hand on his shoulder. Mr. McBride looked into space. Standing so, he spoke once more. Do you really like him, Trini?" he asked, and although he looked into space, Mr. McBride saw Katrina's blush. He patted her hand once, and left her. On his way downstairs, the grimness of Mr. McBride's face relaxed. In the lower hall, he went so far as to chuckle. When he joined Mr. Stir, "Park on the porch," he grinned at him amiably. "I'm a good sport," remarked Mr. McBride irrelevantly, "but I know when to retire to my corner and stay there." "Say," continued Mr. Stir, McBride, unconscious of discrepancies between thought and action, After dinner, I'm going to take you children across the street to see that parrot. 3. Are you oral insurance? The Story of a Wayside Halt, by Clotel Graves, exhausted by the effort involved in keeping the thermometer of the closing day of August at an altitude intolerable to the humankind and irksome to the brute. A large, red-hot sun was languidly sinking beyond an extensive belt of dusky brown elms, fringing the western boundary of a 70-acre expanse of stubbles diagonally traversed by a parish right of way leading from the village of Bensley to the village of Dorton Ware, a knee-deep crop of grasses, flattened by the passage of the harvest wains, clothed this strip of every man's land, and a narrow footpath divided the grass down the middle as a parting divides hair. A snorting sound, which, accompanied by a terrific clatter of old iron and the crunching of road mendings, had been steadily growing from distant to near and from loud to deafening, now reached a pitch of utter indescribability. And as a large, splay-wheeled, tall-funnelled, ploughing engine rolled off the Bensley high road and lumbered in upon the right-of-way, the powerful bouquet of hot, lubricating oil nullified all other smells, and the atmosphere became opaque to the point of solidity. As the dust began to settle, it was possible to observe that attached to the locomotive was a square, solid wooden van, the movable residence of the stoker, the engineer, and an apprentice, that a Powler cultivator, a fearsome piece of mechanism apparently composed of second-hand anchors, chain cables, and motor driving wheels, was coupled to the back of the van, and that a bright green water-cart brought up the rear. Upon the rotund barrel of this water-cart rode a boy. The ploughing engine came to a standstill. The boy got down from the water-cart and uncoupled the locomotive from the living van. During the operations, though the boy received many verbal buffets from both his superiors, it was curiously noticeable that the engineer and stoker, while plainly egging one another on to wreak physical retribution upon the body of the neophyte, studiously refrained from personally administering it. "Hook off, can't ye? Hook off," commanded the engineer. "Eat like a dumpling, that boy has," he commented to the stoker, as Billy wrought like a grimy goblin at the appointed task. "A clout on the side of it would do him good," pronounced the stoker, who was as thin and saturnine as the engineer was stout and good-humoured. "Boys need correction." "I'll allow you're right," said the engineer. "But it ain't my business to it, Billy, for some good. Being own brother too, his sister's husband, it's plainly your place to give him what for, if he happens to need it." The stoker grunted, and the clock, belonging to the Anglo-Norman church tower of the village, struck 6. Both the engineer and his subordinate wiped their dewy foreheads with their blackened hands, and simultaneously thought of beer. "Us been going up to Bensley for a bit, me and George," said the engineer. "And supposing Farmer Shrub should come worting along this way and ask where us are, what be you a-going to tell him, Billy boy?" "The truth, I hope," said the stoker, with a vicious look in an eye which was naturally small and artificially bilious. "Ah, but what is the truth to be this time?" queried the engineer. "Let's get it settled before we go. As far as I'm concerned, the answer Billy's to give in regards to my question or my whereabouts is anywhere but in the tap of the Red Cow." "And everything but decently drunk," retorted the stoker. "That's about it," assented the unsuspecting engineer. The stoker laughed truculently, and Billy ventured upon a faint echo of the jeering cachinnation. The grin died from the boy's face, however, as the engineer promptly relieved a dawning sense of injury by cuffing him upon one side of the head, while the stoker wrung the ear upon the other. "Oh, hoo!" wailed Billy, stanching his flowing tears in the ample sleeve of his coat. "Ow, hoo, hoo, hoo!" "Stop that blubbering, you," commanded the stoker, who possessed a delicate ear. and make the fire and get the tea ready against Alfred and me gets back. You hear me?" "Yes, please," whimpered Billy. "And mind you warms up the cold bacon pie," added the stoker. "And don't you forget to knock in the top of that tin o' salmon," added the engineer, "and set it on to stew a bit. And don't you get picking the loaf with they mucky black fingers of yours, Billy, my lad, or you'll suffer for it when I comes home." "Yes, please," gasped Billy, bravely swallowing the recurrent hiccough of grief. "And please, where be I to build fire?" "The fire," mused the engineer. He looked at the crimson ball of the sun, now drowning in a lake of ruddy vapours behind the belt of elms. He nodded appreciatively at the palely glimmering evening star, and pointed to a spot some yards ahead. "Build it there, Billy," he commanded briefly. The stoker hitched his thumbs in his blackened leather waist strap and spat toward the rear of the van. "You build the fire nigh the hedge there," he ordered, "so as us can sit wi' our faces towards yon bit o' quick and hev the van to back of us, and git a bit o' comfort outside four walls for once. Do ye hear, boy?" "Yes, George," quavered Billy. The sleepy eye of the engineer had a red spark in it that might have jumped out of his own engine furnace as he turned upon the acquiescent Billy. "Didn't you catch what I said to you just now, my lad?" he inquired with ill-boding politeness. "Yes, Alfred," gasped the alarmed Billy, "if the boy doesn't mind me," came from the stoker, who was thoroughly roused. "And if I don't find a blazing good fire and victuals welding hot, ready just in the place I've pointed out to him, when I've had my pipe and my glass at the Red Cow, I'll—" A palpably artificial fit of coughing prevented further utterance. "You'll strap him within an inch of his life." "I say," hinted the engineer. "You pipe what George says, Billy," he continued, as Billy applied his right and left coat cuffs to his eyes in rapid succession. "He's give you his promise, and now I give you mine. If I don't find a roaring good fire and the rest to match, just where I've said they're to be when I come back from where I've said I'm a-going, you'll wallop him a fair treat, I lays you will," said the stoker, revealing a discoloured set of teeth in a gratified smile. "We'll bide by what the boy does then," he added, "knowing that what he gets from either of us he'll earn. Your road is my road, Alfred, leastways as far as the Red Cow." The engineer and the stoker walked off amicably side by side. The sun sank to a mere blot of red fire behind the elms, and crowds of shrilly cheering gnats rose out of the dry edges and swooped upon the passive victim, Billy, who sat on the steps of the living van with his knuckles in his eyes. "Neither of 'em can't kill me, 'cos the one. What did it have to be ung?" he reflected, and this thought gave consolation. He unhooked a rusty red brazier from the back of the living van, and dumping it well into the hedge at the spot indicated by the stoker, filled it with dry grass, rotten sticks, coals out of the engine bunker, and lumps of oily cotton waste. Then he struck and applied a match, saw the flame leap and roar amongst the combustibles, filled the stoker's squat tea kettle with water from the green barrel, put in a generous handful of Tarawaki tea, and, innocent of refinements in tea-making, set it on to boil. "George is more spitefuller nor what Alfred is," Biddy Beasley murmured, as the kettle sent forth its first faint shrill note. Then he added with a poignant afterthought, "But Alfred is a bigger man than what George be." The stimulus of this reflection aided cerebration. Possessed by an original idea, Billy rubbed the receptacle containing it, and his mouth widened in an astonished grin. A supplementary brazier, temporarily invalided by reason of a hole in the bottom, hung at the back of the living van. The engineer possessed a kettle of his own. Active as a monkey, the small figure in the flapping coat and the baggy trousers sped hither and thither. 2 hearths were established, 2 fires blazed, 2 tea kettles chirped. Close beside the stoker's brazier, a bacon pie in a brown earthen dish nestled to catch the warmth. A tin of Canadian salmon, which Billy had neglected to open, leaned affectionately against the other. Suddenly the engineer's kettle boiled over, and as Billy hurried to snatch it from the coals, the salmon tin exploded with an awe-inspiring bang, and oily fragments of fish rained from the bounteous skies. "He'll say I did it a purpose, Alfred will," the aggrieved boy wailed, as he collected and restored to the battered tin as much of its late contents as might be recovered. While on all fours searching for bits which might have escaped him, and diluting the gravy which yet remained in the tin with salt drops of foreboding, a scorching sensation in the region of the back brought his head round. Then he yelled in earnest, for the roaring flame from the other brazier had set the quickset hedge, inflammable with drought, burning as fiercely as the naphtha torch of a fair booth, while a black patch, widening every moment, was spreading through the dry white grasses under the clumsy wheels of the living van, whose brown-painted sides were beginning to blister and char. As Billy, rendered intrepid by desperation, grabbed the broken furnace rake handle, usually employed as a poker, and beat frantically at the encroaching fire. As he beat, he yelled, and stamped fiercely upon those creeping yellow tongues. There was fire from side to side of the field pathway now. The straggling hedge on both sides was crackling gaily. And realizing the unconquerable nature of the disaster, Billy dropped the broken furnace rake, uttered the short, sharp squeal of the ferret-pressed rabbit, and took to his heels, leaving a very creditable imitation of a prairie conflagration behind him. It was quite dark by the time the engineer and his subordinate returned from the Red Cow, and their wavering progress along the field pathway was rendered more difficult, after the first 100 yards or so, by the unaccountable absence of the hedge. It was a singularly oppressive night. A brooding pall of hot blackness hung above their heads. Clouds of particularly acrid and smothering dust arose at every shuffle of their heavy boots. Even the earth they trod seemed glowing with heat, and they remarked on the phenomenon to one another. "It's thunder weather, that's what it be," said the engineer, mopping his face. "I'm like my old mother. I feel it coming long before it's here. Phew! Uncommon strong smell o' roast apples there is about here," commented the stoker, sniffing. "That beer we had must have been uncommon strong," said the engineer in a low, uneasy voice. "I seem to see 3 fires ahead of us, that's what I do. One whopping big one to the left, one little one farther on, right plumb ahead, and another small one lower down on my right, and—" "I see him as well as you," confirmed the stoker in troubled accents. "And that's how that young dipper thinks to get off a licking from one of us." "By obeying both," said the engineer, quickening his pace indignantly. "This is board school, this is. Well, you'll learn him to be clever, you will. You won't leave a whole bone in his dirty little carcass once you're started," said the stoker confidently. By this time they were well upon the scene of the disaster. Before their dazed and horrified eyes rose the incandescent shell of what had been, for 8 months past, their movable home, and a crawling, crisping rustle came from the pile of ashes that represented the joint property of 2 men and 1 boy. "Pinch me, Alfred," said the stoker, after an interval of appalled silence. "Don't ask me," said the engineer in a weak voice. "I haven't the power to kill a flea." "There ain't one left living to kill," retorted the stoker as he contemplated the smoking wreck. "There was 100s in that van too," he added as an afterthought. "Burned up the old cabin," moaned the engineer, "and my Sunday rig out in my locker, and my post office savings bank book sewed up in the pillar o' my bunk, along o' my last week's wages, what I hadn't paid in. I shouldn't wonder if government hung on too, they savings o' yourn," said the stoker, shaking his head. It's a pity, but you'd invested yours as I have mine, he added. In public houses, retorted the engineer. Some of it has went that way, the stoker admitted. But for 3 weeks past I've denied myself to put a bit into a concern as I think is going to prove a paying thing. Ouch! Exclaimed the engineer, who had been restlessly pacing in the velvety darkness round the still glowing wreck of the living van. Don't you believe what I've told you? Demanded the stoker haughtily. You don't always lie, George, said the engineer gently. What made me shout out like that just now, he explained, was treading on something queer down by the near side wheels. Something brittle that cracked like rotten sticks under my heel, and then I slid on something round and squashy, and the smell like roast apples, what I noticed before, is stronger than ever. Have you a match about you? Asked the stoker eagerly. One, said the engineer, delicately withdrawing a solitary kindler from the bottom of his waistcoat pocket. The stoker received the match and struck it on his trousers. A blue glimmer resulted, a faint S followed, and the match went out. Only a glim, said the stoker in a satisfied tone, but it showed me as I've made my money. And made it easy too. How much have you pulled off then? Asked the engineer. Double the value, replied the stoker, smiling broadly through the darkness, of the property what I've lost in this here conflagration. That would bring you in about 18 pence, retorted the engineer bitterly. The stoker laughed pleasantly. Well, do you say to £3.17? He demanded. Better than a poke in the eye with a burnt stick, said the engineer. What did you say was the concern you invested in? The stoker felt in the darkness for his superior's arm, grasped it, and putting his mouth close to where he thought his ear ought to be, said loudly, A boy! Look here, mate, began the engineer hotly, if you're trying a joke on me. It ain't no joke, responded the stoker cheerfully. Leastways not for the boy, it ain't. But Lord, when I think how near I come to letting the policy fall through. He chuckled. It's 3 weeks gone since I took it out, he said contentedly, and paid 3 weeks' money in advance, and at £3 a week, that makes 9p. And the thought of them 9 half-pints, I might have had out of money as drove me half wild with thirst, over and over. I should have had to pay again come Monday, if only he had Harvey lived. If only he had lived, repeated the engineer in a strange faraway tone. Who's he? He asked eagerly. You know old Abby Turner, as keeps the little sweet and tobacco shop over to Dorton Ware? Pursued the stoker. Old Abby is a agent for the popular thrifty life insurance company. I know he is, confirmed the engineer. Abby has been at me over and over again to insure my life, explained the stoker. But I told him as I didn't, old with laying out good money what wouldn't never come home to roost like until I was dead. Then Abby leans over the counter and catches me by the neck handkerchief, and says, think of the worst life you know, and avy a bit on that. Naturally, talking of bad lives, you're the first chap whose name comes into my head. Me! Ejaculated the engineer, starting. But it wasn't wickedness old Abbe meaned, continued the stoker, only unhealthiness in general. Somebody what wasn't likely to live long, that's the sort of man or woman he wanted me to insure. A child will do, says he, smiling. Aunt tells me how. A large family may be made a source of blessing to parents who are wise enough to insure in the popular thrifty. Then it comes into my mind all of a sudden as, how Billy would do a treat, and I names him to old Abbe. That young shaver, calls out old Abbe, disgusted like. Why, he's as hard as nails. What's likely to happen to him? If you was to see the handling he gets when my mate is in his tantrums. I says to old Abby, you'd put your bit of money on him cheerful and willing. Is Alfred Evans such a savage in his drink? Says old Abby, quite surprised. I'll surprise him, muttered the engineer, when I meets him. The stoker continued. So the long and the short is, I insured Billy, and Billy's dead. You don't really think so? Cried the engineer in shocked accents. I don't think, said the stoker in a hard, high tone. I knows he is. Not burned with the van? Gasped the engineer. Burned to cinders, said the stoker comfortably. Oh, about that smell o' roasting you kept a-sniffing as we came along. On what were it if not cooked, boy? What? Was it your foot crashed into when you called out a while back? His ribs in being overdone to a crisp? What was it you slipped on? Stop! Shuddered the engineer. Old Ard, I can't bear it. I can, said the stoker, following his comrade as he gingerly withdrew from the immediate scene of the tragedy. I could, if it was twice as much. It will be that to me, sighed the engineer, seating himself upon the parish boundary stone over which he had stumbled in his retreat, and sentimentally gazing at the star-jewelled skies. Twice £3 is 6, and twice 17, Bob is 1.14. £7.14 is what that poor boy's cruel end has dropped into my pocket, and I'd had those best clothes ever since I got married. Anne. There was only 8 and 4pence in the pillar. Oh, the bunk, Anne. The engineer stopped short, not for lack of words, but because the stoker was clutching him tightly by the windpipe. You don't durst dare to tell me, the frenzied mechanic shouted, as what you went and insured Billy too. That's just what I have done, replied the half-strangled engineer. Then, as the dismayed stoker's arms dropped helplessly by his side, he added, You ought to be grateful, George. You had no, and in it. I couldn't have enjoyed the money properly, not if you'd had to be hung for the boy's murder. That's what I said to old Abby 2 weeks back, when I told him as how Billy's life went more in danger than anyone else's what I could think of, through your being such a brutal, violent-tempered, dangerous man. And what did that old snake in the grass say to that bloomin' lie? Demanded the stoker savagely. He said life was an uncertain thing for all, sniggered the engineer gently. And I'd better ave a bit on the event and turn sorrow into joy, as the saying is. So I give Abbey a shilling, being 2 weeks in advance, and the company sent me the policy, and here I am in for the money. Like what I am, and with clean hands for both of us, said the stoker in a tone of cheerful self-congratulation. I haven't laid a finger on that boy, not since I insured him. Nor I haven't, said the engineer. It's wonderful how I've been able to keep my temper since I had the policy to take care of at the same time. Same with me, said the stoker happily. Why, what's wrong? He added, for a tragic cry had broken from the engineer. Mate, he stammered tremulously, where did you keep your policy? Meanin' a bit of blue printed paper I had from the popular thrifty? What do you want to know for? Snapped the stoker suspiciously. It just come into my head to ask, said the engineer in faltering accents. In my little locker in the van, since you're so curious, said the stoker grudgingly. I had mine stitched up in the pillar or my bunk with my post office Shavin's book, said the engineer in the deep, hollow voice of a funeral bell. And it's burned to ashes, and so is yours. Then it's 19-1. The company won't pay up, said the stoker after an appalled silence. 10 under to 1, groaned the engineer. Another blank silence was broken by the stoker saying with a savage oath, I wish that boy was alive, I do. I know your feeling, agreed the engineer sympathetically. It'd be a comfort to you to kick him, or anything else weak and small what didn't durst to kick back. "If I was to give you a bounce on the jaw," inquired the stoker, breathing heavily, "should you have the courage to land me another?" The engineer promptly hit out in the darkness and arrived safe home on the stoker's chin. With a tiger-like roar of fury, the stoker charged, and on the engineer's dodging conjecturally aside, fell heavily over the parish boundary stone. He rose, foaming, and a pitched battle ensued, in which the combatants saw nothing but the brilliant showers of stars evoked by an occasional head blow and the general advisability of homicide. Toward dawn, fatigue overcame them. The stoker lay down and declined to get up again, and the engineer, even while travelling on all fours in search of him, lost consciousness in slumber. A yellow glare in the east heralded the rising of the orb of day, as the figures of an aged man and a ragged boy moved from the shelter of the belt of elms that screened the village of Dorton Ware, and proceeded along the right-of-way. "It's burned right enough, Billy, my boy," said the old man, shading his bleared eyes with his horny hand as he gazed at the blackened skeleton of the living van. "And all considered, you can't be called to blame." Billy whistled. "If you'd been asleep inside the van when that fear blaze got started," said old Abbe rebukingly, as he hobbled along by the boy's side, "you wouldn't be whistling. My own Bluebell now, your poor widowed mother, what lives in that theer little cottage of mine at Pawbury End, and on, I'd persuaded to insure you in the popular. Thrifty would have had a bit of money coming in. Andy for a Michaelmas rent, and one or two other people would be a penny o' the right side likewise." He paused, and shading his bleared eyes under his gnarled hand, looked steadfastly at two huddled, motionless, grimy figures lying in the charred grass beside the pathway. "Dang my old eyes!" he cried. "'Tis George and Alfred." Alfred and George snatched away. "Aye, they're drinking, neither of 'em insured. I'll lay a farden. Here's a judgment on their lives. What wouldn't listen to old Abbe and put into the popular thrifty? Here's a waste of opportunity. Here's—" Old Abbe's voice quavered and broke off suddenly as the corpse of the engineer, opening a pair of hideously bloodshot eyes, inquired ferociously what in thunder he meant by making such a blamed row, while the body of the stoker rolled over, yawned, revealing a split lip, and sat up staring. We thought you was dead, mates," faltered old Abbe. "Didn't us, Billy?" "At first I did," Billy admitted, "and then I—" "Then you what?" repeated the engineer, bending his brows sternly above a nose swollen to twice its usual size. "Out with it!" snarled the stoker, whose lip was painful. "I was afraid as it couldn't be true," stuttered Billy. The stoker exchanged a look with the engineer. "The van's burnt, and we've both lost our property, to say nothing of our prospects, mate," he said with a sardonic sneer. "But one comfort's left us. Billy's alive." A little later, the ploughing engine with its consort was at work under the hot September sky. As the Powler cultivator travelled to and fro, ripping up the stubbles, the boy who sat on the iron seat and manipulated the guiding wheel snivelled gently, realizing that the brief but welcome interval of icy aloofness on the part of his superiors had passed, never to return, and that the injunction of the prophet would thenceforth be scrupulously obeyed.